"We'll be back in an hour, Dad. Just need to grab lunch." My daughter's voice echoed down the hospital corridor as she walked away, her heels clicking against the linoleum. That was 4 hours ago. I sat alone in the recovery room after emergency surgery, tubes in my arm, morphine fog making the ceiling spin. The nurse kept checking the visitor log, confused. Still no family? When my phone finally buzzed, it wasn't an apology. It was a text from Jessica's husband. "Paperwork signed. Thanks for finally cooperating." That's when I understood. They hadn't forgotten to come back. They'd gotten exactly what they came for. You're probably wondering how a 70-year-old retired attorney ends up abandoned in a hospital bed while his own daughter forges documents in the parking lot, and why I'm telling you this story with complete calm instead of devastation. Let me take you back 2 weeks before that surgery. Because what Jessica and her husband forgot is that I didn't spend 40 years practicing contract law without learning to read the fine print of betrayal. My name is Thomas Bennett. I'm 70 years old, a retired estate attorney who spent 4 decades protecting clients' assets from predators, fraudsters, and family members who saw inheritance as something to accelerate. I drafted ironclad wills that survived decades of legal challenges. But nothing in my career prepared me for the moment I discovered my own daughter was trying to exploit a medical emergency to steal everything I'd built. 2 weeks before the surgery, on a Saturday morning around 10:30 a.m., I found a document folder hidden behind the microwave in my kitchen, a strange place Jessica had assumed I'd never look. Inside were printouts from an elder law website. Emergency conservatorship, when is it necessary? Highlighted in yellow. Medical crisis provides legal grounds for immediate appointment. Handwritten notes in Marcus's blocky script. Scheduled hernia surgery March 14th. Post-op equals 48-hour window. Power of attorney insufficient. Need full conservatorship. At the bottom, a checklist. Hospital social worker consulted. Elder attorney retained. Property appraisal ordered. POA revised without Dad's knowledge, in progress. My hands were steady as I photographed every page. This wasn't concern about my upcoming routine surgery. This was a timetable, a strategy session treating my medical procedure as an opportunity to seize legal control. But what I discovered 3 days later made this seem like amateur hour. I started listening more carefully. On Tuesday evening, I heard voices from the den, the room that used to be Jessica's childhood bedroom, now converted to my home office. Marcus's voice carried through the door, confident and calculated. Once he's sedated and recovering, he'll sign anything we put in front of him. Classic post-anesthesia confusion. Courts see it as competent consent, but he won't remember what he signed. Jessica's response was quieter, hesitant. What if he asks questions? Marcus laughed, sharp and dismissive. He's 70 and coming off morphine. We tell him it's standard hospital paperwork. By the time he realizes what he signed, we'll have full conservatorship and access to everything. That's when I understood this wasn't just about controlling my assets during recovery. It was a surgical strike, using my own medical vulnerability as the weapon to dismantle 40 years of careful estate planning. They'd been researching this for months. But the evidence I uncovered 4 days later proved they'd catastrophically underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. 4 days before the surgery, I discovered the most damning evidence of all. In Marcus's briefcase, left carelessly open on the dining table while he showered, I found a consultation agreement with an attorney specializing in emergency conservatorship proceedings. The retainer fee receipt was dated 6 weeks back, before I'd even scheduled the surgery. Attached were draft court documents claiming I suffered from progressive cognitive decline, requiring immediate intervention. listing fabricated incidents, financial mismanagement I'd never committed, appointments I'd never missed, confusion that had never existed. I sat at that table for 20 minutes, staring at Jessica's signature as a petitioner. The same signature I'd taught her to write in cursive, practicing on legal pads in my law office while she waited for me to finish work. Now, she was using it to build a fraudulent case against my competency. That's when I realized I had spent 4 decades drafting contracts that protected people from exactly this kind of exploitation. Now, I needed to construct a legal fortress strong enough to withstand betrayal from my own bloodline. The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront them. I wouldn't show my hand. I would do what I'd always advised clients: build a defense so legally bulletproof that no court would entertain their claims for even a minute. I contacted my former law partner, Richard Chan, who had practiced alongside me for 25 years. When I showed him the documents, his expression darkened. "Tom," he said, his voice grave, "this is textbook elder exploitation. Financial abuse with premeditated fraud. You need counter-documentation immediately, and you need it filed before that surgery date." That afternoon, I began constructing the case that would dismantle their scheme, clause by clause. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a man on a mission. I scheduled comprehensive cognitive assessments with 3 independent physicians. I had my financial advisor prepare detailed reports proving perfect mental competency in managing complex assets. I met with Richard to create an irrevocable trust with successor trustees they couldn't touch. I installed security cameras throughout my home office. I documented every conversation, every manipulation attempt, every lie. And I updated my medical directives to explicitly exclude Jessica and Marcus from any decision-making authority. Because I knew the confrontation was coming. And when they tried to ambush me in that hospital room with fraudulent paperwork, I would be ready. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a man on a mission. I scheduled comprehensive cognitive assessments with 3 independent physicians. I had my financial advisor prepare detailed reports proving perfect mental competency in managing complex assets. I met with Richard to create an irrevocable trust with successor trustees they couldn't touch. I installed security cameras throughout my home office. I documented every conversation, every manipulation attempt, every lie. And I updated my medical directives to explicitly exclude Jessica and Marcus from any decision-making authority. Because I knew the confrontation was coming. And when they tried to ambush me in that hospital room with fraudulent paperwork, I would be ready. But to understand why this betrayal felt like a breach of contract with reality itself, you need to know what this house, this life, represented. I built this estate planning practice in 1981, the same year Jessica was born. My late wife, Linda, used to bring baby Jessica to the office on Saturdays, letting her sleep in a bassinet beside my desk while I drafted wills and trusts. Every asset I protected for clients, I protected doubly for my own family. When Linda died 7 years ago from a stroke, Jessica held my hand at the funeral and promised, "I'll take care of you, Dad, the way you took care of Mom." For 6 years, she kept that promise. Monthly visits, holiday dinners, phone calls just to check in. Until 14 months ago, when she showed up with Marcus and suitcases saying they needed to stay temporarily while Marcus transitioned between jobs. I said yes, because I remembered the little girl who'd played lawyer in my office, pretending to argue cases with stuffed animals. I didn't realize that temporary meant permanent takeover. That Marcus's job transition was actually mounting gambling debts and a mortgage in default. That my daughter's concern was camouflage for desperation. When I scheduled the hernia surgery, routine, low risk, I told them casually over dinner. Jessica's eyes had met Marcus's across the table for just a fraction of a second. I'd seen that look 1,000 times in depositions. The moment a witness realizes they've just been handed an opportunity. I thought I was sharing medical information with family. I didn't realize I was handing predators a timetable for attack. Richard's analysis was methodical and frightening. Tom, I've seen this pattern in elder exploitation cases. They're using a surgical procedure, something requiring anesthesia, as grounds to claim you're impaired. Post-operative confusion is temporary and normal, but they'll frame it as evidence of permanent decline. He spread out my copies of their documents across his conference table. This timeline is calculated. The moment you're in recovery, they'll present documents claiming immediate conservatorship is necessary. Hospital social workers see these situations constantly. They might not question it. By the time you're alert enough to object, they'll have filed emergency orders with a judge. He looked at me directly. Without counter-evidence filed preemptively, you could lose everything before you even understand what happened. That afternoon, I authorized Richard to take aggressive defensive action. Within 48 hours, Richard had constructed a legal firewall that would have made my younger self proud. First, we filed a declaration of competency with the county clerk, notarized statements from 3 independent physicians confirming perfect cognitive function, supported by formal neurological assessments I'd completed that week. Second, we created an irrevocable trust, transferring my primary assets to professional management, naming Richard and my brother Stephen as successor trustees. Jessica and Marcus weren't mentioned anywhere in the documents. Third, and most critically, we filed preemptive medical directives with the hospital where my surgery was scheduled, explicitly excluding Jessica and Marcus from any medical decision-making authority. We named Stephen and Richard as my healthcare proxies instead. Finally, Richard prepared a comprehensive affidavit documenting their scheme, ready to file with Adult Protective Services the moment they made their move. Every document was dated, witnessed, and legally unassailable. 2 days before the surgery, Richard's paralegal made a discovery that turned my blood cold. While running routine background checks, she found that Marcus had already filed preliminary paperwork with the county probate court, a notice of intent to petition for emergency conservatorship dated 3 weeks earlier. The filing claimed I was a vulnerable adult requiring immediate protective supervision due to advancing age and declining capacity. Every single word was a fabrication. But it established something terrifying, an official paper trail suggesting there was concern about my competency before the surgery even happened. Richard explained grimly, "This is sophisticated. They're creating a narrative. They've been worried for weeks. When they file the emergency petition post-surgery, it won't look opportunistic. It'll look like concerned family members finally taking necessary action." I sat in Richard's office, reading the filing 3 times. The document used clinical language, cited elder care statutes. It was fiction, presented as isolation and resistance to assistance. It was fiction, presented as legal reality. "This isn't just greed," I said quietly. "This is a systematic demolition of my legal personhood." Richard nodded. "Which is why we're going to demolish their case before they can even present it." Over the next 48 hours, I documented my independence with the precision I'd once applied to discovery in high-stakes litigation. I maintained detailed logs, meals prepared, bills paid, legal research conducted, physical activities completed. Richard helped me compile bank statements proving meticulous financial management, not a single missed payment, not one questionable transaction. I had my primary care physician write a letter affirming I was in excellent cognitive and physical health for age 70, requiring no assistance with activities of daily living. Stephen flew in from Denver to provide witness statements. We compiled photographs of me hiking, managing home repairs, attending legal conferences. Every piece of evidence painted the same picture: a fully competent, independent adult. The precise opposite of the vulnerable victim Marcus and Jessica were trying to fabricate. The night before surgery, I made one final discovery that broke something fundamental inside me. Jessica had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she went to the store. A folder labeled "Dad, Medical Event" sat prominently on her desktop. Inside were documents that made me feel physically ill. Screenshots of my bank account balances. They'd been accessing my financial information for months using passwords I'd trustingly shared. Spreadsheets calculating the value of my home, my retirement accounts, my life insurance policy. Estimated totals, $2.8 million. But the emails were what destroyed me. Jessica to Marcus, dated 6 weeks earlier. Dad scheduled surgery for March 14th. This is our window. If we don't move now, we're looking at years of waiting while he spends our inheritance on who knows what. Medical event gives us legal grounds. Estimated timeline, conservatorship established within 72 hours post-op. Property transfer within 30 days. Marcus's response: perfect. Clock starts the moment he's in recovery. We'll have everything signed before he's coherent enough to understand what happened. They were talking about me like a business acquisition, a target to exploit during a vulnerability window. My daughter, the child I'd raised, educated, protected, had authored those words. I sat in the dark kitchen for an hour thinking about Linda. In her final days, struggling to speak after the stroke, she'd squeezed my hand and whispered something that sounded like, "Protect yourself." I thought she meant from grief. Now I understood. She'd seen something in Jessica I'd refused to acknowledge. The next morning, I drove to the hospital alone. Everything was in place. Richard had the evidence. Stephen was my designated proxy. The legal fortress was built. When Jessica and Marcus showed up at the hospital with their briefcase full of fraudulent documents, they'd discover I'd already won. The surgery was routine, 90 minutes, no complications. Awoke in recovery at 2:47 p.m., groggy but alert, to find Jessica and Marcus standing beside my bed with unusual attentiveness. Marcus held a leather portfolio. Jessica's smile was too bright, her voice too cheerful. "Dad, you did great. The doctor says everything went perfectly. We just need you to sign some hospital paperwork while the nurse witnesses it." My phone was recording in my jacket pocket on the chair beside the bed. "What paperwork?" I asked, keeping my voice weak, cooperative. Jessica pulled out a stack of documents. Standard post-operative forms, release papers, insurance verification, medication protocols. Her hands trembled slightly as she offered me a pen. I took the papers and started reading. Not skimming, reading with the careful attention of 40 years reviewing contracts. The morphine made the words swim slightly, but my training held. It took me less than 30 seconds. Buried on page 4, between medication disclaimers, was a power of attorney document granting Jessica and Marcus full authority over financial, medical, and legal affairs. Another paragraph down, consent for emergency conservatorship proceedings. I looked up at Jessica. This isn't hospital paperwork. This is a POA with conservatorship language. The brightness drained from her smile. Marcus stepped closer. Dad, you're confused from the anesthesia. This is standard. Everyone signs these. I'm an estate attorney with 4 decades of experience, I said quietly. I know exactly what this is. I reached for my phone and pressed a button. Richard entered the recovery room right on cue, Stephen behind him carrying a briefcase. Jessica, Marcus, Richard said formally. I'm here as Mr. Bennett's legal counsel to inform you that any documents presented to him post-surgery without my review constitute fraud and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I pulled out the folder Stephen handed me. For the past 2 weeks, I've been documenting your scheme. Security footage showing you searching my office. Recordings of your conversations planning this ambush. Copies of your fraudulent conservatorship filings. Financial records proving you've been accessing my accounts without authorization. I placed each document on the bedside table. Jessica's face had gone white. I've also executed an irrevocable trust, removing both of you from any inheritance. Filed medical directives excluding you from healthcare decisions. And contacted Adult Protective Services with a complete report of attempted financial exploitation. Marcus's voice turned vicious. You ungrateful old man, we've been taking care of you. You've been living in my home rent-free while plotting to steal it during medical vulnerability, I said. My voice was steady, surgical. And Jessica, you left me alone in this hospital for 4 hours. Not because you forgot, because you were meeting with your attorney to finalize the paperwork you thought I'd just signed. The silence was absolute. Jessica's composure shattered. We had no choice. You're sitting on millions while we're drowning in debt. This was inevitable. You would have wasted it all. Get out, I said quietly. Both of you. Security is outside. If you attempt contact again, I'll pursue criminal charges for elder abuse and attempted fraud. A hospital administrator arrived with security. Richard presented documentation of the attempted exploitation. Marcus muttered threats about countersuits, but his voice had lost all power. At the doorway, Jessica turned back, tears streaming. For a moment, I saw the 10-year-old who'd played in my office. Then the door closed. After they left, Richard and Stephen stayed while I was transferred to a private room. We didn't talk much. Stephen sat beside my bed reading the news on his phone. Richard reviewed documents. The room felt quieter than any silence I'd ever experienced. Winning doesn't feel like winning, I said finally. Stephen squeezed my shoulder. No, but losing would have felt worse. 3 months later, a letter arrived. Jessica's handwriting, less controlled than usual. She wrote about the gambling debts Marcus had hidden from her, the foreclosure she'd discovered only after they'd moved into my home. I convinced myself that your money was somehow already ours, that we were just accessing it earlier. Marcus said you'd never miss it, that you were old enough it wouldn't matter. She described the moment in the hospital when she'd seen my face reading the POA, like watching you realize I'd become someone you didn't know. I don't expect forgiveness, she ended. I just wanted you to know that I see what I did, and I'm horrified. 6 months later, I sat on my back porch watching autumn leaves fall across the garden Linda had planted decades ago. A postcard from Jessica lay on the table. Seattle, a new job in nonprofit management, separated from Marcus. She sends updates monthly now. No requests, just reports.
I haven't responded yet. Stephen says some contracts, once breached, can never be fully restored. The house is quiet, but not empty. Richard visits weekly. Stephen calls every Sunday. My law practice colleagues check in regularly. I look at Linda's photograph on the mantel and whisper that I'm okay. Because I learned what 40 years of law had tried to teach me. True protection isn't found in the contracts we draft. It's in knowing when to enforce them, when to void them, and having the wisdom to recognize which relationships were void from the start.
But one critter moment didn't care for that. Somehow, that little bunny was out safe.